final afternoon of the conference. Our next panel is going to be moderated by Mr. Jay Veith. Mr. Jay Veith, an independent scholar and author, and he'll be taking things from here. So thank you, Jay. Oh, Jay, I'm sorry. There is only one microphone in the audience now, so everyone will have to make their questions from my far left or far right. We had to move the microphone from the center up to the stage.
Thank you, Steve. This afternoon, we're going to talk a little about the fall of South Vietnam and the defeat of the South Vietnamese Army. To me, perhaps one of the least understood time frames of the war, and for myself personally, one of the most fascinating. Our first speaker is actually my pleasure to introduce a dear friend of mine, Captain Kim Do from the Vietnamese Navy, and I wanted to read to you all something that was written by the naval advisors in the Defense Attaché Office in their final report. And this is quoting from the DAO's final report. The overall enemy threat, coupled with the almost insurmountable refugee problem and the ever-changing immediate tactical situation, dictated minute-by-minute direction from naval operation centers located at the naval headquarters in Saigon. This direction came directly from the CNO, Vice Admiral Kang, and his key staff members, particularly the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, Captain Kim Do, who was considered the officer most responsible for providing sound decisions and positive direction to the outlying units under nearly impossible conditions. This task was extremely difficult under the pressure of the impending fall of the country and the decided lack of guidance from higher headquarters. So again, it is my pleasure to introduce Captain Kim Do.
Thank you, my friend. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To start my presentation, I would like to quote Colonel William Le Gros in his book, Vietnam from Ceasefire to Capitulation. He said, "To be the enemy of the United States could be discomforting. To be a friend that the Republic of South Vietnam found to its sorrow could be fatal." Yes, many Vietnamese, including veterans, to this day still do not want to accept the quick, tragic end of the South Vietnamese army, an army that had never lost a major battle nor concede any terrain with population along it to the enemy, at least to the ceasefire in 1973. Our army just evaporated, disappeared. But for me, there was a prelude to any disaster. And the commencement of this tragic ending had begun on January 27, start with the Paris Peace Agreement on January 27, when North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, the United States, and South Vietnam signed the agreement on ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam. This peace agreement was supposed to bring peace, and the entire free world was ecstatic about it. But ironically, none of those four signatories believed that the peace accord would work. For the communists, it was obvious because they knew what they are going to do next. For the United States, they were happy to be able to pull out of Vietnam, retrieve the prisoner of war, and save some face. But President Nixon, and particularly Henry Kissinger, the architect of the accord, they knew all along that allowing North Communists to keep their 150,000 soldiers in the South was equivalent to keeping a time bomb in your house. Fortunately, it's not their house, it's our house. As for South Vietnam, there were no celebrations in Saigon because we knew our half-brother from North all too well. This was only one step backward before the Great Leap. President Thieu at first vehemently denounced the terms of the accord, which were tantamount to surrender. But President Nixon sent him a letter secretly pledging to take swift and strong retaliatory action if North Vietnam violated the proposed peace treaty. Thieu had to sign the accord. Not much he could do. As foreseen, 2 months later, March 73, the communists launched a major attack on Hong Ngư, a town on the Mekong River, with 3 regiments. And it took the South Vietnamese army 2 months to retake that town. During those fighting, we learned the bad news. Watergate. Watergate, April 73. Yes, the immediate impact of the Watergate investigation was a serious weakening of the Nixon administration. The U.S. Congress took advantage of it and to wrest back its powers, to enhance its anti-war agenda and activity. June 1973, the Congress passed the Church Amendment, which forbade any further military involvement in Southeast Asia by prohibiting any fund whatsoever to finance directly and indirectly combat activity by U.S. military force in or over or from offshore of North Vietnam, South Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. This was a terrible blow to the South Vietnam. It was a clear message to Hanoi that it could break the accord, invade South Vietnam, and the United States would not react. North Communist Hanoi received this message loud and clear. Without fear of the U.S. bomber B-52, Hanoi immediately intensified its infiltration through the Ho Chi Minh Trail and across the DMZ day and night with thousands and thousands of trucks with impunity. Thousands of tons of supply were accumulating in the southern stockpile. Troops, tanks, artillery were moving south at the same cadence. By 1974, communist artillery and tank strength in the south had increased fourfold. A whole air defense division, plus 12 air defense regiments, special regiment with SA-7 and radar control gun were added to its force deployed in South Vietnam. View from the south, this warning was very clear. Although there was still a rough parity of power between South Vietnam and North Vietnam, the South Vietnam army still stood firm in the wave of communist attack that increased every day in frequency and in intensity. It was obvious that the army was under heavy requirement to protect a dispersed population and a long line of communication. On the other hand, the North VA had considerable flexibility in the choice of objective and the choice of force to employ. And it also has 6 divisions, full strength, well equipped, in reserve, ready to throw in the battle anywhere at any time. Against that ominous backdrop, it was clear to South Vietnamese politics and military leadership, and also to the Saigon U.S. officials, that continued logistical support would be absolutely vital to the survival of the South Vietnam Army. The U.S. fund portion for the Army fiscal year 1974 called for $1,126 million, downward from $1.4 billion for 1973. This was because a reduction in expenditure was expected as normal consequence of the ceasefire. But it was not so, because right after the ceasefire, the war resumed again, and more intense and more ferocious. On December 19, 1973, in spite of the obvious failure of the peace accord, the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, under the leadership of Senator Ted Kennedy, voted to slash the budget from $1.126 billion down to $650 million. This created a serious shortage for all operational and maintenance funds to Vietnam for the balance of the 1974 fiscal year. And the most critical shortage was in ammunition for the South Vietnamese force. And the one-to-one replacement for expenditure and ammunition committed by the U.S. was not on time or often ignored. On April 3, 1974, Senator Kennedy again refused to raise the ceiling on the fiscal year 74. The Defense Department under Schlesinger kept trying one more time. They told the committee that, hey, we have found $266 million from the previous fund, unspent. So please, don't include the $266 million into the 1974 budget. But May 6, Kennedy said again, no, no more. You cannot include that in the fiscal year 74. Very concerned about the fate of the 1975 budget, on May 21st, Defense Secretary Schlesinger sounded the alarm to the press that it was we who told the South Vietnamese that we would give them the tool and they would have to finish the job. It was we who undertook the commitment to replace their combat losses on one-to-one basis. Any further reduction will seriously cripple the South Vietnamese capability to defend themselves and will be a violation of the clear understanding they had from us at the time of the ceasefire. At the same time, from his defense attaché office in Saigon, General Murray kept warning Washington that cut and economy have mortgaged the future of South Vietnam. The quality and responsiveness of medical service had suffered terribly. Life-saving supplies were depleted. Hospital admission for wounded had increased from 8,750 per month during the first 3 months of 74 to 10,000 per month at summer. In the field, the impact was immediate. Experienced infantrymen accustomed to carry out 6 to 8 grenades to the battlefield, but now are limited only to 2. Artillery was limited to clearly defined target. No more harassment fire. The combat divisions are losing their communication flexibility. The availability of armored personnel carrier, the main fighting vehicle of the armored cavalry, was sinking to only half of the strength. 1/5 of the Vietnamese Air Force was grounded. The Navy had lost 58 ships and boats, and none had been replaced. In his 30-page four-budget level analysis, General Murray predicted at level 1, with $1,128 million, we would see a gradual degradation of equipment base with greatest impact in the 75. Little reserve of flexibility to meet major enemy attack. At level 2, 900 million. Degradation of equipment base will have significant impact. No reserve, no flexibility to meet major offensive. At level 3 budget, 750 million. Equipment loss could not be supportable. Operation fund would not even support hardcore self-defense requirement. Level 4 budget, 500 million. This budget would be equivalent to the write-off of the Army. That means with 500 million, no more Army of the South Vietnam. General Murray went on, the Vietnamese are a determined people, capable of defending themselves and progressing economically, provided they are giving the tool we promised them when we decide to end our own military participation. And he asked for a budget of $1,450 million. August 9, 1974, President Nixon resigned. Gerald Ford was sworn in as the 38th U.S. President. Right 1 month after, September 74, not giving the new president the time to breathe or to form any coalition, the anti-war Congress passed the Defense Appropriation Bill for fiscal year 75, which include only 700 million for the Vietnam. Now, in the 700 million, the bill provided that we have to include on the expense undelivered in the fiscal year 73-74 item, plus the operation of the cost of the defense attaché office. That left about less than $500 million for the requirement of the RVIN. As you can see, it's equivalent to the write-off the Vietnamese Army. In other words, it's the death of the South Vietnamese Army. Encouraged by this news, immediately October 74, the Politburo of Hanoi decided to launch an invasion of South Vietnam. On January 28, 75, President Ford formally requested an appropriation of $300 million for Vietnam. March 12, 75, the House Democratic Caucus voted heavily in favor of the resolution opposing more military aid for Vietnam. March 13, 75, the House Foreign Affairs Committee rejected a compromise proposal that would have provided some additional aid. Faced to that anti-war Congress, which was so determined to abandon Vietnam, President Ford made a last attempt to come to the joint session on April 10, and request $722 million in emergency military aid for Vietnam. He pleaded, the options before us are few, and the time is short. We cannot abandon our friend. The Senate Army Service Committee of Ted Kennedy disagreed, and on April 17, rejected the appeal. It was reported that President Ford, very upset, very angry upon learning this project, he pounded his fist on the table and said, "Those bastards!" Ladies and gentlemen, disaster was predicted, disaster had ensued. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Kim Do. That was very enlightening. I'll just provide you a very quick vignette on General Murray and the aid cuts. General Murray was the last MACV logistics officer, and as a result of the 72 offensive, ARVN ammunition, artillery ammunition stocks were below the 60-day minimum supply that had to be had in country. And so in December of 72, General Murray ordered 6 ships full of ammunition to come to South Vietnam and restock their ammunition supplies. And those ships were steaming towards South Vietnam with 60 short tons of ammunition in their hulls. And instead of telling the ships to speed up and get to Saigon port before the signing of the Paris Peace Accord, the Pentagon managed to screw that up, and they were still at sea when the Paris Peace Accords were signed. And so the Pentagon ordered those ships to turn around and go back to America, taking those 60 tons of ammunition with them. So ammunition, ARVN artillery stocks were never replenished after the Easter offensive. That's just sort of one small sidebar issue in terms of the whole funding things. Our next speaker is Mr. Hai Chu, who was an ARVN captain working in the Kung Wah Hospital in '75. He is the editor of a book series called The Untold Stories, which basically has each chapter written by a different soldier about his life or about a particular battle. I have strongly encouraged the publication of this book series, and I hope that many of my South Vietnamese friends will write their stories to be included in his series of books. I find them to be very helpful, not only to my own research, but to my secondary goal of getting the South Vietnamese people to tell their stories so that they're not lost to history. So if you please welcome Mr. Hai Chu.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Vietnam Center, for making this event reality. And dear American and Vietnamese veteran, ladies and gentlemen, this 30 years just passing on our gray hair since the collapse of Saigon, my beloved capital. And it seemed to me that the pain and the sorrow of the broken heaven, Saigon May Day 75, just happened yesterday. In Vietnam War, we have the ability to win over the North Vietnam Communist, but we were forced to become losers. In other words, we were not allowed to be the winning party. That is the sadness of our country in general and of our Republic Vietnam Army in particular. On the recent pages of our country history, seemingly still smeared with the blood of our comrades in arms, only some part of the truth was uncovered. But the fact that South Vietnam and the Republic Vietnam Army have been forced to surrender is very clear. I'd like to mention some citations to back up what I think. Number one, but it was never the military defeat that many claim. Most of the men and women, American and South Vietnamese, who fought bravely and died in Vietnam did so essentially for the same ideal that Americans have died for every war. The war managers were the ones who failed. Another flash of freedom by Ron Wright. Number two, the United States Army and the South Vietnam Army have not lost the Vietnam War, but the policy makers and the members of the U.S. Congress have forced us to lose it. I have fought with you during 4 years and admire you, and I still admire you now. I think that at the end, the freedom and democracy will win the final victory. General Westmoreland. Number three, the interview with General Westmoreland by the Thao Luang newspaper. Question, as a commander of the U.S. Army in Vietnam, how do you find the fighting capabilities of the U.S. Army and the South Vietnam Army when confronting with the North Vietnam Communist Army? General Westmoreland answered, I admire the highly combating spirit of the South Vietnam Army as of the U.S. Army. I have nothing more to share. It is because the end of Vietnam wars were originated by political problem, not by military reason. Number 4. During cabinet meeting on the next day in the White House, Kissinger reported, at this moment, all the North Vietnamese army are in the South. We only need a brigade of Marines to conquer the North. The Paris Peace Accord have been severely violated. During the first week of April, there were a lot of effort behind the scene to overturn President Thieu. Things turned out finally. The South Vietnam had two enemies, the Communists and the United States. This one I cite from Larry Berman's book. This is my opinion. Only a brigade of Marines. At least we have 4 battle-tested divisions of South Vietnam, the well trained. Hanoi has violated the Paris Peace Accord, and while the United States did not overrun North Vietnam to liberate Hanoi, the United States did not do a thing. Number 5. Later on, when asked why North Vietnam never provide a complete list of reasons of war, Vernon Wonders answered that Le Duc looked at Kissinger's face during the peace talk in Paris and said, I don't know why I need to talk with you. I have just talked with Senator McGovern during 6 hours. The anti-war movement in your country will force you to give me what I want. That's Le Duc. I cite this document in the book of Larry Berman. Number 6, we came to Vietnam first of all to help the South Vietnamese only, not in order to win the North Vietnam. We gave our hand and the South Vietnamese took it. Now they need our help more than ever, more than anything. Standard 20 million people of South Vietnam have turned the war about the threat that would on their destiny, about the attachments with the values when they live without the communists. And they told us about their dream to find a way to live the same life as before, different than do of people under harsh laws of the North. Number 7. On April 30th, 1975, after the fall of Saigon, South Vietnam is no more. In the White House, a cabinet meeting was called. The atmosphere was done, but Kissinger still found something positive. We have safeguarded our honor by evacuating 42 to 45,000 of Vietnamese people. Major General Vernon Wonders, the military attaché who accompanied Kissinger in and out Paris during the secret meeting, did not look at things like that way. Until now, he still keeps a South Vietnam flag in his office. When asked about the flag, he replied that it presents mission unfinished. we have left 39 million people falling into the slavery. This I saw this one from Larry Corman book. Number 8. South Vietnam have fought faithfully during 25 years and were helped by the United States. I think that no country can stand such a long and divided war. In sum, that army had been better than people assessment. Peter Camp. Number 9. On the historical defeat and the incompetence, cowardice of the Western leader are heaped on the back of the Vietnamese soldier. It dishonest and unfair. The shame is on us and not on the South Vietnam Army. David Habitat, Newsweek. Number 10. Now, the Vietnam Communist Party stopped seeing the invasion of South Vietnam as one of their victories. If communism is an utopia and the expectations are unrealistic, when they build up the war, sacrificing millions of people to impose their doctrine on the nation, and it is a mistake. And more than that, it occurs. But the most important thing is that the books will show that the South Vietnam had defeated the communists in the battlefield, in the village, and in the forest. This one from the Victory Lodge by Professor Stevia. Yeah. Thanks to the political climate in United States, not even that measure of support were available when the North Communist attack again in 1975. And we proceeded to abandon 17 million allies to Communist John Mueller. Now, I translated into English to the poem of poet Che Lang Vinh. He said, Mậu Thân, 2,000 people went to the plant, but only 30 people survived after just one night. 1968, we defeated the North Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, it exactly like what General Wayan presented in number 6. The Americans came to Vietnam just to help us to defend ourselves, not to win the war. Or more clearly, the Americans did not want or did not let Republic Vietnam Army and the U.S. Army to win the war. They fight General Westmoreland, and at last they forced us to fall apart. South Vietnam and Republic Vietnam Army have been sacrificed. And in the war, peace after disintegration of the Soviet Union, there were the contribution of our blood and our honor. We have to share it to the war now and in the future. Our group military writers have contributed our effort to this hard mission of our country in general and of our South Vietnam soldiers in particular. And when the American Army, American force said goodbye to the battlefield from Mekong Delta to Ben Hai River. Gradually, we, the South Vietnam Army, alone, I said alone, fought back the North Vietnam Communists supported by the whole Soviet bloc, including China. General Binh, the last president of South Vietnam, surrendered to the communists. Our army not surrendered. I am not here to make a propaganda. We are proud of our army. I think the Vietnam War is not over yet. We are waiting for the collapse of the Hanoi regime coming soon. And in the name of democracy and freedom for my beloved country, I am still a soldier. Thank you.
Okay. Our next speaker is ex-professor Win Tay Tien, who taught in Hanoi until 1978 and then moved to Saigon Polytechnical College and taught there until 1992, and then he moved to Canada. He teaches theoretical mechanics. I have no idea what theoretical mechanics is, but it sounds pretty good. I'm thinking about adding that to my resume. J-Vite, independent researcher, and theoretical mechanic. It's got a ring to it. So anyways, please welcome Professor Win Tay Tien.
First of my words is to thank us for Vietnam Center allowing me to make this presentation here today. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation has a title, the word of praise for the South Vietnamese Army. It has 5 short parts and will last around 15 minutes. As the next ex-senior instructor for 27 years under the communist regime, first at Hanoi until 1977, and later on at Saigon University until 1982. I'm here today to share with you my perspective on the South Vietnamese Army and its regrettable death in 1975. This is a viewpoint from a special angle of one who was living under the communist regime for some 38 years. First of all, let's talk about mission of an army, any army in the world. For me, an army is created with sacred missions of defending the country against outside invasion and protecting its people from any harm and destruction by all enemies. Both the South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN, and North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, existed in parallel as opposing forces in the cold and hot wars between the free world led by the United States of America and the communist bloc with the big brother Russia. For more than 20 years, the ARVN valiantly waged a defensive war to protect a place in the sun for South Vietnam and the traditional ways of life of its people. Even when handicapped by the Paris Conference in 1973 and virtual abandoned by its American ally, the South Vietnamese Navy still had courage and stamina to fight the sea battle of Paracels against the much stronger navy of the communist China that, profiting troubled situation of South Vietnam, quietly invaded the Vietnamese islands in January 1974. The NVA dubbed the Army of the People under false pretense of liberating South Vietnam from the imperialist Americans, were actually fighting for the interests of their masters, Russia and China. In September 1975, just 3 months after the event in 1975, in a conference for about 1,000 of high-ranking cadres and professors of the Hanoi Polytechnic University, Hoàng Tung, the editor-in-chief of the People newspaper, said, "In this war, the Americans spent $100 billion and lost everything. Our big friends Russia invested only $4 billion US dollars and reaped $10 billion US dollars through the bleeding of the US dollars." Furthermore, Russia seized the opportunity to soar in her space program and gather the many secret technologies of the US weaponry, particularly in the field of air forces. As for China, exploiting the desperate need for war support of Hanoi regime, she crudely extorted concession of territory along Vietnam-China border and the continental shelf at sea. In 1956, Ho Chi Minh, on his way back from Russia, from the 20th Communist Party meeting, was gently persuaded to stop at Peking for about 1 week. He probably then had signed a friendship agreement which opened up to the 1958 acceptance of China's claim of territorial water and continental shelf, tacitly recognizing Chinese sovereignty over the Paracel and the Spratlys. We all know now why Hanoi was silent when China invaded the Paracel in 1974 and later in 1999 and 2000 years gave away 700 kilometers of territory along the border and 11 million square kilometers of territorial water to their Chinese master. This is the unerasable historic crime against our fatherland, our home, and of his Communist Party. During the war, the Communist regime of North Vietnam tightly controlled information about their losses on the battlefield. Using the tactic of the tidal waves of troops, the NVA sent hundreds of thousands of very young soldiers born north to die south. However, the people did come to the conclusion that the ARVN was a formidable force to be reckoned with. For example, by December 1967, all Southerners cadres were favorably prepared to head south for an eventual turnover of South Vietnam administration. But in spring 1967, nobody talked about this anymore. Then, during the second half of 1968, a great number of low-ranking officers were transferred to civilian jobs in manufactories and governmental offices. Why? My brother-in-law, a medical doctor in the NVA, told me then that those officers no longer had the spirit or the guts to fight after the defeat of that offensive. They were replaced. In the end of 1968, I met a young officer of an NVA division operating around Hue, center of Vietnam. This gentleman told me that after his division was pushed out of Hue, they were stopped on their way back and had to fight their way through the south of Laos to get back to North Vietnam. By the time they reached their destination, their division had only 800 men left. After that serious military loss in the Tet Offensive, Hanoi Communist government had to lower the draft age to 15 and 16 and enhance that age all the way up to 30. For most of us, no communist intellectual in the North, we believe that Ngo Dinh Diem, the first president of South Vietnam, did right by siding the free world, particularly with the Americans. This was the right direction in step with the law of progress of humanity. Also, accordingly to our proverb, living among rich people, if you have a toothache, you can eat soup. Living among the poor, if you get sick, you just have to suffer alone. If South Vietnam did not exist all those years through 1975, with the propensity of communist North of giving away the land of our forefathers in exchange for power and support, our Vietnam would have been a Chinese territory long ago, before 1975. We would have nothing left today to protect, to rebuild, and to improve. If in 1954, North Communists did not leave behind a great number of cadres to sabotage the progress of South Vietnam for many years, and if they did not send the NVA to invade the country in 1975, South Vietnam certainly would have been a strong, developing country at the same level, if not higher, if not more advanced as Thailand and Malaysia. And Communist North Vietnam would be way behind in all aspects. Why? Because no communist country can progress and develop under the imposed format of communism. This is a historic reality. The South Vietnamese army, the backbone of South Vietnam, was truly an army that upheld its Soviet missions to protect the country, Vietnam, and its people, and to contribute greatly to the American strategy that caused the collapse of the communist bloc. Forced to fight a defensive war in very difficult conditions, this army violently stood its ground for more than 20 years against the combined force of the international communist bloc. The ARVN did help Vietnam to preserve its national character and the traditional culture of the rest. After their invasion of South Vietnam in 1975, Hanoi regime did inherit a sound economy and a well-trained workforce. However, because their lack of administrative skills and their rampant corruptions, Vietnam is still a poor and more backward country in the Southeast Asia. Whatever the communists have today, that still allows for some hope of recovery and development, is the inheritance of the contribution and sacrifice of the South Vietnamese people, especially of the South Vietnamese army. In spite of the many efforts of the North Communists in distorting history, I believe that the South Vietnamese army has been and will certainly continue to be recognized by the Vietnamese people, North and South, as a staunch keeper of the heritage of our forefathers. I think the struggle between the two ways has not been ended. It continued until the final victory of the right way. Thank you for your time and attention.
All right, thank you, Professor. We are in the enviable position of having plenty of time for questions. I wanted to very quickly sum up and remind everybody that the microphone over there is going to speak at. Obviously, the three major factors that lead to the cause of South Vietnam were the U.S. aid cuts, the ban on bombing, and the tremendous amount of infiltration of men and equipment in the post-ceasefire years led to the almost inevitable collapse of South Vietnam. So, having said that, we have plenty of time, and it looks like we already have a group of, shall we say, scholars standing there ready to ask their pithy questions. Go ahead, sir.
Steve Sherman. After the fall of communism, the client states, for the most part, all tumbled one at a time. In Vietnam, that wasn't the case, primarily because my wife and a lot of other people in this country sent sufficient funds over to Vietnam to replace the billions of dollars that the Soviets had been giving the Vietnamese there. Now, after the passage of another decade, the government is pretty firmly entrenched as a kleptocracy with a security service to protect it. Now, what could I have done to keep my wife from sending the money over there? And what could the rest of you do?
I think you've reached the limits of our ability to solve your domestic issues. But apparently the valiant Captain Kim Do appears to give it a shot. So, sir, it's all on you from here on.
Sir, I have the same problem. Yes, we have been discussing that matter within our community at length and at large. But it's very, very touchy situation. One side, when you have your family in Vietnam that need money to survive, what would you do when you have extra money over here? What would you do? Secondly, we know that by sending an average $3 billion a year to South Vietnam, that is more than 3 times the budget of the RVN. We know that we help the communist regime to survive. But that is the question right now. Some people, myself, believe that by keeping my family alive, they did have the gut to fight within Vietnam, because they will see that that government is extorting their money, extorting the welfare of their life for themselves. And that would be a nucleus for opposition.
Mr. Laurie, you are next on deck.
Bill Laurie. A statement and a question. The statement is that in discussing the 73 to 75 debacle and the cutback of American aid, which most Americans now have generally come to understand, what's seldom discussed, at least in the American media, is the fact that the Republic of Vietnam had about 50% inflation, 25% unemployment, and from early 74 on, RBNF soldiers were going hungry all the time, as were their families. The poverty was just crushing. And what's amazing is not that the Republic of Vietnam fell in 1975. What amazed me when I was there, and it hurt me terribly to see this suffering, is that these guys kept on fighting. I think American troops would have mutinied. You're going hungry, you don't have enough ammunition, you don't have anything, and they kept fighting. And as I said yesterday, a lot of them didn't give, a damn about you. They loved Vietnam and they hated communism. And the fact that they continued on is just an inspirational miracle. Question to Dr. Tien. What was very important in the eventual outcome in the war as a result of a long-term process was Hanoi's Dick Von program. Did the United States conduct anything of any value whatsoever in a counter-Dick Von program in North Vietnam? And the only thing I've ever seen is a leaflet that was dropped during the ArcLight strikes in December of 1972, which had a picture of President Nixon and an apologetic statement as to why he was forced to do this. My feelings is that the United States never knew it was in a Dick Von war, and it never came up with anything that was effective in the North. And I think that would have been fairly easy to do. Thank you.
Just to quickly explain to the few people that don't know what Dick Von is. Dick Von is the Action Among the People program. It's the attempt to propagandize the enemy to surrender, or at the minimum to stop fighting as hard as they should. Okay.
Yeah, and Dick Von also, as does Vinh Yan and Yan Von, has multiple audiences. In the case of Dick Von, the propaganda was directed to the United States, to the Europeans, to any and every audience that might contribute to an undermining of American resolve. Very effective.
Well, yeah, Dick Von was directed not only at Americans, it was mainly directed at South Vietnamese. Vinh Von was one that said, I'm sorry, please, Mr. Professor. There were efforts built by the SOG forces to, sort of this, whatever that was called.
He believed that the United States really didn't want to win that war. That is his opinion. It's why they did not do anything more than what they did.
Was there anything in Vietnam at all?
Cái gì không làm thay đổi đồng thời thì cách đánh của Mỹ là thế này. Thứ nhất là leo thang, thứ hai là không đánh vào động não, thứ hai là chủ yếu đánh vào giao thông và kho tàng, không có đánh vào cơ quan đầu não, là cơ quan đầu não, nếu cơ quan đầu não không được như bạn Tùng đã nói là hai bên đấu với nhau ngày 18 đến cái lúc sắp dứt điểm thì cái Mỹ mật Mỹ đã có thiếu sức.
Okay, his answer is that there is a mistake in the way of conducting the war from his opinion, that it is an escalating war. It's not a total. And the United States did not strike at the nervous center of Vietnam. And you only strike on the transportation road, that kind of thing. And also, when you get to the crisis point on the 18th of December, bombing of B-52, you stop. You didn't go furthermore.
Thank you. Sir?
My name is Troy Kelly. I received a briefing in the late 70s that said that the basic load of the 105 howitzer in Vietnam at the time of the fall of Saigon was 5 rounds. Also a factor that played largely into the fall was the fact that the Russians were monitoring the communications of the Americans, and that the general in charge of North Vietnam, I can't recall his name, got to the outside of Saigon and he dug in, expecting perhaps one of the big 52 scrambles from Guam. Russia informed him that they were not coming, and that's when he went into Saigon.
Yes, I think that the you know that communication is very important in war, and at that time the division, combating division, were losing their flexibility in communications. They have no more battery to replace the old one, and they couldn't allow the attached force to have use of the SSB system. It really it's a cut in communication, and that gets worse and worse, and that really hurt the army.
My question is, how do you all view the coverage of the American press of the Vietnam War, and do you see a parallel between how the press is covering the Iraqi War?
Oh yeah, sure. Now I got to answer that question, right? Let me just go back to your earlier points. First off, I can tell you the ARVN artillery batteries had more than 5 rounds. They still had probably about a 30-day supply of artillery ammunition. They had the DIO had shifted funds around to basically buy artillery ammunition and fuel the last year or so. So that was their main expenditure was on artillery ammunition. So they had not enough, but they still had artillery ammunition. Whether the Walker spy ring was able to actually provide the Russians and hence in the North Vietnamese American communications remains a great mystery. I don't think we'll ever find that out until somebody cracks the Russian archives. As for Van Tien Zoom coming down to Saigon, he arrived at the Cosvin B-2 front headquarters on 3 April, and there was concern about whether the Americans were going to make a military strike. As a matter of fact, they began sending down SA-2 units from out of Khe Sanh, but there was never any indication that they were expecting or feared a B-52 strike. They were more worried about probably tactical error or something of that nature. And as for the press coverage, well, that's a hot potato that would take an hour to describe. We have, yes, Steve.
The equipment that Walker turned over to them was the same equipment being used between Saigon and NKP. The Russians had a monitoring station at NKP.
The Russians had a monitoring station at NKP. Okay.
Outside of it.
Hi, my name is Ann Tulu, and my question is to members of the panel as well as the ladies and gentlemen that are here. It has to do with the peace treaty, not the ARVN, but since the peace treaty is the death certificate of South Vietnam and the ARVN, so I thought it's appropriate. My understanding is the U.S. came to South Vietnam to help the South Vietnamese fight against the communists. And the last time I checked, it didn't negotiate with North Vietnamese when it came in. I didn't understand why, for the peace treaty, it was negotiating it and initiating it with the North Vietnamese before informing the South Vietnamese people. Because to me, it's detrimental because of 65-3 thing. Number one, there was no partnership or equal partnership between the U.S. and South Vietnam. Also, it signifies to our enemy that we were in a losing position when we started to, negotiate. And the third, and more detrimental, is the fact that it's giving the communists a reason, or more of a reason to, advertise to the world that it has a cause to fight the American and, as an imperialism who went over to dominate and colonize Vietnam again. So I hope to find an answer because it's always puzzled me. Thank you.
Before we answer that question, I would like to put to the whole audience a question from a man who lives in the north. He said that how come the Americans are so naive to believe in the propaganda of the communists? That is the question from Mr. Tien.
That's my big question.
Ambassador Fong, you want to try and answer M2's question? I think with a little more perspective.
30 words or less.
Yeah, 30 words or less. Don't make me go get Steve Baxter. Okay?
20 then.
20 then. Very
I was
good.
going to pass.
We have an agreement.
Really, I was going to pass. Because I passed a lot already in the last 30 years. But let us say that we have to face the facts of life. You know, the realities of life. You cannot blame that the US did not try. They tried very hard, believe me. And when you say that they quit, it was because it was no longer possible for them to do anything else. And they had to go home, you see. And so the thing was that the question we should ask in this session, I lived through those moments. Because after the letter of the 18th of January 1973, Nixon to Thieu, I was called back from Paris for a National Security Council meeting. I spent about over an hour with Thieu because he had to make the decision to sign or not that thing. And the meeting was already convened there, waiting for more than an hour for us to go there. I arrived from the airport, I went into Riley to his office. And in short, the US, Thieu said to me that the agreement would be a sheer sellout to the Soviets. And so we asked ourselves that if the US found itself in the position of no longer able to do anything, it had to choose between the Chinese and the Soviets. And it was the decision of the US to give that region to the Soviet to placate the Chinese. That is the big context of the whole war. The second thing, when we went into the meeting, of course it was traumatic. Even Vice President Hun cried out loud. We all know that. But the question that you should ask here is, if Thieu was relieved of all his fear and apprehension because of the content of the Paris Agreement, Nixon relieved him by those letters and promises. And we relied on those things. We were not fooled. We knew how the situation. And when the whole thing degenerated, the question you should ask here, and we ask ourselves, how are we going to die? And I put it in my little book. And I said to Thieu, would you lead your troops for the last battle in honor? Let us die that way. And that was the battle of conscience for him. Without any bullets left, what would he do with his million troops? Ask them to fight in the last bullet for Big Min another few weeks? Or what I said to President He that very night. I said then when I came back in Saigon 5 days before the fall of Saigon, I said, well, are you going to surrender to save the city to begin with, the bloodbath so-called, you see? And then I said, if you do that, there are lots of others who can do that. You don't have to do it personally. And I put that in my little book too. Lots of them would be glad to do that. You go home and have a nap, and that wouldn't change anything at all. So that was also the question put to us at that time. We had to face those problems. Those are the facts of life, you see. And so in the end, who surrendered to Minh, not to the North Vietnamese. Thank you.
Excuse me. My question is, why didn't the U.S. negotiate with South Vietnamese to get out? Instead, it negotiated with the North Vietnamese and forced the South Vietnamese to go along. That was my question. I didn't question the fact why the U.S. wanted to go out.
Well, the way I understand it, when you talk to the United States, you kind of incorporate the administration and the Congress, and which was not so. If you are the administration, maybe the answer could be the way we understand. Why not negotiate with us? And you just leave, and let us have the tool to fight. And that is exactly what we, the United States, the administration had discussed with President Thieu at the peace agreement too. that they will give us the tool and we'll finish the job. But the Congress thought otherwise. For the Congress, no. They just don't want to get involved anymore. But the thing that Ambassador Fong said, that at that time, not much you can do, just go home, things like that. The thing is that for people at the responsibility, a position of responsibility, they just couldn't do that. They have to do something. They have to do something. And that something there, we can interpret it now as a quarterback, Monday quarterback, and say that no, that is not the way, it should be like that, it should be like this. But based on the information that we had at that time, based on the option that we could take at that time, they have to make a decision, right or wrong. So I really don't blame them at the last moment. The prelude is there. It's clear.
Let's try to get to some more questions.
You can put anybody in there, it's not going to change.
Thank you. Ambassador, sorry, Admiral Tidd, you were right.
Admiral Tidd, may I accept part of the blame for the American people? We were fooled, we were lied to, there was a loss of will by the leaders at that time. You got to go back to the demonstrations in the streets, the riots that were taking place. Congress lost their backbone. They then came through with the legislation. The military leaders wanted to be honest, straightforward, and continuing to support. The people in country, our advisors, the information that they had, they were trying to relay it to their counterparts. The only thing that we can say is Mr. Kissinger was trying to cut the best deal he could. Now, you've got to remember there was a much larger context in the world at that time. We were concerned very seriously about the rising Soviet threat. They were building submarines at the rate of 12 a year, while we were eking out one every other year at that time and making cutbacks. President Johnson absolutely didn't know what to do, and finally he was convinced after Mr. McNamara had lied to him the facts, and then President Johnson lied to the American public about the facts. And I think you all must read Larry Behrman's No Peace, No Honor to get a very good grasp of what took place, the duplicity, and what we are still ashamed of that we're in the military. I know that senior leaders wept over what was happening.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Colonel Whitcomb, hopefully you have a question we can actually answer.
Yeah, General Wickham, and I have a very direct question. I should like to quote some of your own words back to you. Dr. Tien, you said that the December bombing of 1972 did not go far enough, that we should have hit the nerve center. What do you mean by nerve center?
Nerve center, that's the square, the area of around 3 times 4 kilometers where all the central
The government, the head of the government. Okay.
No bullet, no bomb, no bullet into that area. A large area of 3 times 4 kilometers. Barding area. No bullet.
Not one bullet.
Not one bullet. Touch there.
Yeah, that's a liberal choice by the U.S. government.
Absolutely
because
was.
the,
That was a restriction imposed by us.
because to reduce
So
civilian
nice
casualties.
to the headquarters of communism. No.
The ones were too nice. We're under
So
tremendous
nice.
fire worldwide.
And
Condemnation.
you
I
have
mean,
trained the communists.
press,
Support
bombing the dikes.
your attacks. The escalation. Escalation in war. What does it mean? A training, right? A training for their support. Why you do that? Why you did that? That means that you didn't like to do it, right? I am a scientist. I have the logic to draw my conclusion. I taught theoretical mechanics. It's the base for mechanical engineering and civil engineering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Colonel, is that your question, or do you have another question? Go ahead,
Yeah,
sir.
one more question. Okay. Another quote. Now, this was Mr. Hai Tru. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, you said the war is not over yet, and we are waiting for the Hanoi regime to collapse. Now, do you really believe that's going to happen? And if it does, then what do you think will happen?
I specifically told you to ask us a question we could answer, okay? Once again, you're not following instructions.
Thank you. Every Vietnamese in Vietnam, in United States, and in Canada, in Australia, want to see what I say in the corruption of Hanoi regime. This is the dream, but the dream come true in the near future or not, I don't know. But we try to keep fighting this way or another way. So the struggle for freedom inside Vietnam, outside Vietnam now continuing, and we are a part of them for revolution, the new area for Vietnam without communism and without communist regime. I hope so.
We all hope so. Mr. Triet, please.
Thank you, Jed. I hope I have the question that I can answer.
You're under the guidance.
I'll try. Actually, this is a question for Bác Hải Triều, Bác Kim Do, and you too as well, Jay, and perhaps maybe the senior, junior and senior Army officer of the South Vietnamese could answer me. About a year ago, while researching my MA thesis, I get the opportunity through Ms. Lilento to interview her father, but also Major General Nguyen Duy Hinh, in which I asked, near the end of the interview, I asked, well, how long could the South Vietnamese military could hold out without the U.S. support? Basically, how many months could they fight alone? And he told me that Lieutenant General Dong Van Quyen, the logistic commander, estimated, it's just an estimation, as it's about 6 months that they could fight without U.S., just whatever remained if they determined to fight. And when I read your article, Sung Lao, the art of fighting, I believe near the end you recall that Brigadier General Lê Minh Đào, after the front was collapsed, he still was very determined to move back to the 2nd Corps and the 3rd Corps, and the 3rd and the 4th Corps to continue the resistance. So my question is that, was there any plan on the part of the South Vietnamese army, whatever is left there, to retreat back and continue resistance to hold out? Second of all, for example, as you see in 1961, the rebellion of the paratrooper, and in 1963, the army has always rose up in defense of the people first before the government. I was wondering, was there any attempt to overthrow any government in Saigon that on the verge of capitulation to continue the struggle? This is, I don't expect a clear answer, but it's just
I can answer your question. Your second question first. Were there coup attempts? Don't look at me, Din. Well, Nguyen Cao Ky was certainly making some noises towards the end, and there were a few rumblings from a few generals. But I think the majority of the military was under the that they were not going to instigate a coup. It would have been a disaster for them, I think, and as General Liu Lang can discuss this more at length. But my impression from talking to the generals that I know is that other than Win Kao Keenan and a few disgruntled VNAP officers, the vast majority of the Army officers were still, I don't want to say, not that they were entrenched behind Thieu, but they realized the stupidity of creating a coup at that time. As to plans to retreat to a Mekong Delta redoubt, there were certainly discussions about it. There were even some small plans drafted. As a matter of fact, the 9th Division was ordered to go hold Route 9, and there were some discussions of the Airborne Division moving back, but the general consensus is without supplies, without the ability to move the military in a coherent fashion, blow the bridges behind them, and form a defensive base that have been essentially useless. But that's the impression I've got from talking to a bunch of people. Do you have a different perspective on things?
I don't think that I would have a different opinion about that, but I do know that I did take some decision when a few days before the collapse, when one of our ships asked me, the authority, to get close to the shore to blast off some of the tank, the communist tank moving on the road. And I knew that the area was dangerous to get in, on the, as a navigation on the problem concern. And besides, I told them that, I told the skipper that it's useless. Killing some more communists now is not going to save our situation. And it just puts you at risk. So it's up to you. That is my advice for elect.
Sir.
If I may make a brief elaboration on some of the information, the question about targets. This is the wrong group to ask about that. The targets that were selected were really sensitive and significant to the military. Those decisions were not made by the military. They were made by Mr. McNamara and President Johnson. This was one of the greatest irritants to the senior leadership. It almost caused the resignation of some of them, but they decided they could do a better job if they stuck with it and didn't quit and run themselves. It was and the reasoning by Mr. McNamara and President Johnson, they were concerned that it would bring China and Russia into it. Post-war information is Russia wanted no part of it. China did not either. They were preparing for other things. One of the questions about comparison of that era and Iraq is a very good one. And the media was the thing that really brought the people out in the streets in the 1969s and 70s that broke the back of Congress's will. Now, today, some more military leaders feel like weeping as we see the same thing recurring again. And it really is a concern. As you listen to CNN in the morning, in the evening, at night, if Coca-Cola were to take that kind of adverse publicity, do you think they'd stay in business very long?
Dr. Sorley.
Yes, since there are no further questioners and a couple minutes left, I'd like to make a short statement, if I may.
You have the floor, sir.
This has to do with writing by Vietnamese about the war. As I'm sure all of our panelists can see, and others have, we have intense interest in the story in the larger compass and in detail as you viewed it. And one of the panelists this morning said he was writing a book and he was going to self-publish it and he was just going to give it away to anybody that was interested. And I wanted to comment then, but we ran out of time. That's not only not necessary in my view, but it's not the most effective way to go either. There are plenty of publishers who would like to see memoirs by Vietnamese and analyses by younger Vietnamese about every aspect of the war, and there's an audience for it. And if you self-publish, several not good things happen. First, very few people know about your book. Second, because of the economics of it, you can't distribute to very many people. But third, and perhaps most important, nobody's going to review it. Hardly any self-published books get reviewed, and none get reviewed in major publications. But if you give your book to a publisher and let them make a commercial enterprise out of it, they're going to advertise it, it's going to get reviewed, lots of people will know about it, and then it will have been worth the effort. So this is a modest plea to Vietnamese of our generation and of younger generation. Please get it down in writing, and then don't give it away. Find a publisher, and there are lots of us who would be glad to help you try to do that. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, for a short footnote, Steve brings to my hand a copy of a very fine book that many of you must know about, A Sense of Duty, Quang Pham. He and I have become friends. He's a wonderful young man. He's done a terrific book, and he represents himself very well when he goes around to present this book. Just an example of the kind of thing that can be done. I was able to get him on the author lecture series at the National Archives, where he did a great job and gave me the privilege of introducing him, and we were able to get C-SPAN to come, and they taped that, and now that's been shown, I don't know, several times. That's going to keep being shown forever. So thanks, Steve. That's a good added addition to what I wanted to say.
We have time for a couple more questions. If anybody has any? But, well, thank you very much for paying attention and coming to visit our panel. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back at approximately 3:15, 18 minutes or so, for our final session. So thank you very much.